Super. Well, hello and welcome. I'm Hannah Keartland, and I started Keartland Co because I believe that businesses can and should be a powerful force for positive change in the world, not as a side project or a nice to have, but really woven into the very kind of fabric of what they do and how they do it. I've spent almost 20 years working with purpose-led organisations, from Cancer Research UK to Innocent Drinks to ambitious, impact-focused startups. And what I've learned is this: when impact is designed into your purpose, your strategy, your business model, your governance, then something really remarkable happens. Scaling your business becomes sort of scaling it commercially goes really hand in hand with scaling your positive impact. And so it stops being a trade-off and it becomes this really, your impact becomes this key ingredient of growth, loyalty, and legacy. And so that's what today is all about. Learning from pioneers who've lived this journey and can really show us what's possible when we get strategic about impact. So I am thrilled to be joined by three incredible speakers who have transformed impact from theory into reality in their organizations. Sally Pritchett, Sebastian Elwell, and Shelley Lawson. They are going to share the honest truth: what's worked, what didn't, and what you can take away and use in your own business. So let's dive in by letting them introduce themselves. So, Sally, Seb, Shelley, you've all taken your career in a direction that enables you to have a meaningful impact through your work. So, could you introduce yourself and what your business does by explaining how having a meaningful impact has influenced your career choices and your career journey? Uh, Seb, do you want to kick off?
Hi everyone. So I'm Sebastian Elwell. I'm director of Switchfoot Wealth Limited, which is a small financial planning firm that I set up in 2018. I came and joined my wife, who set up Switchfoot Accounting. So Switchfoot is small. There's four of us between the two businesses. But as a financial planner, which is income, expenditure, assets and liabilities projected into the future for the rest of your life, I spend my time looking at the long term. And the long term is where some stark choices that we can make today start to crystallize. So I guess the impact journey started for me in trying to be realistic and honest about what the future looks like. And then that inevitably came back to what do we need to do today, therefore, in order to create a future that's worth planning for.
Super, thanks, Seb. Who do you want to pass the hot potato to?
Shelley is next to me on my screen anyway. So
thank you, Seb. I'm Shelley Lawson. I'm one of the co-founders of Frog Bikes. So we're a manufacturer of lightweight children's bicycles. I set the company up with my husband 13 years ago, and we do most of our manufacturing in the UK. We have a factory in Wales. So in terms of impact, clearly getting more children active and cycling, and for cycling to just be a daily part of life and for them to enjoy it was really key to us. But as we got bigger, and to date we've made over 500,000 bikes, we were also acutely aware of our impact in terms of the materials that flow through our hands and the energy that we use and the travel and so on. You know, we're small by bike brand standards, but as we got bigger, we were just aware how much aluminium we were buying, rubber tires, cardboard packaging, etc. So we have really tried, particularly the last kind of 5 or 6 years, to pioneer being a low carbon manufacturer as well. I'm happy to go into some details during this conversation about what we've done, what's worked, what's been difficult. But we're now trying to have an impact by talking to everybody who will listen about the benefits of it, the challenges, how to overcome them. And personally, I'm now spending more than half of my time away from Frog and supporting other SMEs around the UK who are trying to become more low carbon and more responsible as well. So that's a way I'm trying to leverage a bit more impact personally. Pass to Sally.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Hannah. I'm Sally Pritchett. I'm CEO of Something Big, and we specialize in helping businesses drive better workplace culture through their employee communication. And my passion for that sort of workplace culture stems from my early career, where I worked in a commercial role, but in a very large corporate organization. And I learned a lot about how business works there and how to make profit. But I also learned it came at a bit of a cost. So after doing a decade of really long hours that pushed several of my colleagues into sort of burnout and lots of inequities, particularly gender inequities, and what I felt were really a lot of missed opportunities, I thought there really has to be a better way. So I co-founded something big with a bit of a quiet strategy of doing things my way and putting people first. And I very, very quickly learned that great workplace culture doesn't come at the cost of profit. In fact, quite the opposite. It drives growth, it drives innovation, great service, customer loyalty, brand attraction, employee retention, and just loads more. So I've spent the last 20 or so years guiding businesses all over the world on how to make their workplaces fairer, healthier, and happier so that we can thrive as businesses commercially, but also culturally.
Amazing. Thank you. And hopefully you get an insight into why I've asked these three brilliant people to join us today. Quite different businesses, different experience, and lots of experience that they can share with us. But before we start doing that, I am keen, well, we are all keen to know who you are. So who's in the room? We've got, 50 or so of you here today, and we would love to know a bit more about you. So we've just got 4 questions we would like to ask, 4 nice and easy questions. So we're going to do that through a poll. And if you could answer those, we would love to know a bit more about you, please. I feel like we need some music now, an acoustic guitar around the campfire.
Lift elevator music.
Definitely the answers I can see so far are showing we've got a good mix in the room, which is what we thought. And that's why we've got 3 speakers who can talk about very different experiences within their businesses. So I'll just give you a couple more seconds and then I'll share the results. And so you can all get a sense of who's here as well. Okay. So I will share those results with you now. So what you can see, so in terms of size of business, over 50% of you are micro businesses, but then we've got, right through to some extra large businesses, 1,000+ employees, big, sort of 300 million pound plus turnover, and a spread in between. So big range of businesses here. In terms of ownership, majority are privately owned, founder, family, friends. 1 employee owned business, which I'm sure Sally will be.
That might be me.
Well, I think one of your colleagues might be here. 7 people from partnerships, 1 that's taken on external investment, and then some others as well. How would you describe your business? So that's interesting. So the vast majority are service-based. But I think knowing some of the people in the room, that some of them might then have clients who are product-based. So I'm sure that some of your experience, Shelley, through Frog and product-based would also be relevant. Where is your business on its responsible business or sustainability journey? Complete spread here. So right the way through from not started and early stages, done the basics, right the way through to being advanced and leading and inspiring others. So all at very different stages on the journey. So there will be, there's going to be a wealth of valuable insights that I know that these 3 speakers are going to share with you today. Take what's meaningful for you, take what you can take away and action after today. There will be lots. And I've got some questions for the speakers. They've promised that they are going to share their real stories, their mistakes, their learnings. This is not a polished presentation. They're going to share it with you, warts and all. And as we're as they're speaking, as we're having a conversation, I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions. So please do put these in the chat as we go along. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. Heather Davies, who I work with on impact reports. She's here. She's keeping an eye on the chat, and she'll keep an eye on those questions as we're going through. And please do also engage with each other's questions and comments. Use that chat so that you can be having a conversation as well and answering some of the questions as we go through. But let's get started. Sally, I want to start with you. If you were starting over today, what would you do differently in how you approach impact at something big?
I mean, I think it's really simple for me. I would start with purpose at our core from day one. I didn't do that because I didn't have the confidence. And I was taught that the purpose and goal of business was profit. And I didn't have the confidence to dismiss that. And I love this analogy that Simon Sinek uses of business as a car, and that profit is the fuel that moves that car, but it is not the destination. And I wish I had that analogy in my back pocket in the year 2000 when I started, because I had learned from the corporate environment, and I totally believed that profit was the purpose. And I just didn't have the confidence to dismiss that.
Mm-hmm. So what was the turning point then where you realized that purpose was so important, and also where then, impact and making a difference really shifted from being a nice to have to being really core to what you do at something big?
So yeah, it was very clear. There was a turning point in 2020. Now you might think I'm referring to the pandemic, and of course I am, but you'll also all perhaps know that it was my 50th birthday. You don't know, but obviously, there was a kind of a meeting of the stars, if you like, where we were going through a global pandemic that wiped out more than half of my business. We had a lot of clients that were in the retail, hospitality, leisure sector. So we were sort of on our knees, as it were, just like many businesses were. But I was also turning 50, and I was really questioning the kind of achievements I'd made I was like, wow, I've run a successful business, had a corporate career, etc. But so what? And I had that moment to rebuild, but in a really intentional way. And I was lucky to find B Corp at the same time and employee ownership. So while we couldn't go out to restaurants because we were in lockdown, I spent my evenings figuring out what the BIA meant and just looking at these questions going, I don't understand this. And I took myself on that journey on my own, and we emerged. And I look at it now and I think we emerged out of the pandemic a bit like a butterfly, because we came out with this purpose at our heart, and we transitioned to employee ownership in the midst of that and B Corp certification. So it was a very beautiful time for us in some way.
Yeah. No, super, thank you. And just for those of you who aren't aware, so BIA, which Sally mentioned, is the B Impact Assessment, which is the set of questions that you would go through to, you get assessed against those questions to become a B Corp, but you can also look at them even if you're not thinking about it, and they're a useful way for starting to think about impact in your business. Seb, Shelley, anything you would say to sort of build on what Sally said or share your experience within your businesses?
Just picking up on what Sally said there. I suppose I'm coming at it from, I'm a financial planner, so I do build people's financial plans the whole time, and so I sort of built my own financial plan. So I knew what I wanted to achieve, and therefore what the business needed to do in order to do that. So business for me was a way of achieving things out of life that were important to me that had nothing to do with business. So, given if I could do anything, I'd probably be growing food or sailing. But so running a business was not the purpose as such. There was always another purpose, and so that was the first purpose that got me inspired. So I really rhyme with what you say when you say you found the purpose, that it was around that connection between financial planning and the business, and working out what we wanted the business to do, and then extending that out. And I suppose we didn't have a defined impact goal at the beginning, but what we did have right at the very beginning was we sat down and we went through what our core values were, and one of them was lifelong learning. I've sort of ended up where I am because I just keep taking professional exams, and I've laid that out for the rest of the team. So it says in our employee handbook that if you're not doing some form of professional exam, then I assume you've run out of them to do, and we'll then pay you to learn something, whether it's a language or something like that. On the basis that I want to work with curious people that are, if you're not learning, you're stagnating, so learn something. And that has really helped because we don't know how to build a sustainable society. We don't know what truly good impact is. We've all got to learn there together. So having that openness to curiosity, to change, to constantly learn, I think has been very useful to have that formalized and have the business built around that.
That's really interesting. I've just started reading a book on leading in a non-linear world, and that learning piece and that willingness to test and learn and not look back at how things have been done in the past and extrapolate that is, I mean, I've only really, I've literally just started it, but that was one of the key messages of the introduction is we can't do that. We've been able to do that in the past and we can't do that anymore. And we need to be constantly testing and learning and trying things out, willing to fail,
Yeah, because finance is a complex dynamic system. You don't go, what worked in the past, we'll keep doing that. It stops working. You have to keep doing new things for it to be effective. And so the economy is going to be in transition. We're going to have to do new things in order for that to be successful.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in there with the moment that I can pinpoint to what really changed my approach to our manufacturing as well. And I'm a frustrated sailor. I don't get to sail quite as much as Seb does, I think. But one of my real heroes has been Ellen MacArthur, who was a very successful solo yachtswoman. And when she finally hung up her sailing wellies, she had realized that the way that we live on our planet with very finite resources that we're burning through too quickly has a lot to learn from single-handed yacht racing, bizarrely, because when she set sail, she had a very finite number of resources on her boat and she had to make them last. And she couldn't use them up too quickly. And she didn't want to take anything that was unnecessary. And I think that's a fascinating starting point, a way of looking at the world's finite resources. And I love what the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has now done on helping the circular economy kind of take on, become more commercially available, I guess, to all of us. There's a huge amount that we can learn from some of the businesses they've worked with, some of the case studies they have. And for us, for me personally, it was a light bulb moment of saying, right, we are far too linear in the way that we buy aluminium, turn it into a bike, send it out of the door and never see it again. How can we completely reinvent what we do, our supply chains, our relationships with our suppliers, with our customers, and just try to build some more circularity and some more longevity, more repairability into what we do? We're a very long way from having all the answers. But I love that model. It's kind of easy to get my head around. Difficult to put into practice, but we've made some progress towards it. But that for me was the turning point.
And great. Hannah, if I'm allowed to jump in, and we're doing book recommendations, a book recommendation I would make then on your point, Shelley, is around, it's called Beautiful Constraints by Adam Grant. And he is sort of the intelligence a bit behind Airbnb and Uber and concepts like that. But it's about putting our constraints a bit like, in a sailing boat, you've only got a certain amount of resources and you've got to get to a certain distance. It's about putting those to the heart of our business and saying, well, we can't do this. And then you're like, oh, well, we can if. And I think that's a really great blueprint. I used that for our business, and that really helped us go, well, we can't impact the entire workforce. And we're like, well, we can if we do it like this. And so, yeah, that I'm just jumping in there, but Hannah, I'll shut up now.
No, it's a great point. I mean, when I was back in my days leading innovation teams, we wanted constraints. We didn't want freedom. I think people often assume that if you're innovating, you want to have a blank sheet of paper, whereas actually it's constraints that really spark great ideas. And we saw that in COVID, didn't we? Super. Okay, and I remember that, yeah, the Ellen MacArthur, that's the only non-fiction book, I think, where I've got to the end and turned straight back to the beginning and started it all over again. Around the world. So Shelley, coming to you, what's something about running an impact-led business that's really surprised you or that nobody really talks about?
I think the fact that we've actually found quite a lot of commercial benefits from being more sustainable manufacturers. So in all honesty, Jerry and I started trying to work on this because we felt it was the right thing to do. And we're probably prepared to make some commercial sacrifices in order to do the right thing. We haven't had to, which really surprised us. So particularly in terms of sourcing. I mean, obviously with lots of businesses, you start with energy efficiency, so you deliver savings quite quickly. But then scope 3 hits you and it's all of your materials that you buy. So the biggest thing for Frog, because our frames are made of aluminium, which is of course very highly polluting, was switching from virgin aluminium frames to part recycled, post-consumer recycled aluminium. And that was really difficult to do because our suppliers weren't working with it. They didn't trust it. They didn't know if they could do it. So it took a lot of tenacity to try and persuade them to do so. But when we eventually started getting some recycled aluminium into the supply chain, we put all of the prototype frames through our testing suite, which we've built in Wales. So very rigorous fatigue testing. And we found that the recycled frames were stronger. We hadn't expected it's quite complicated chemistry in making aluminium, so we think we understand why, but we certainly didn't expect them to be. We didn't need them to be stronger, we just needed them to pass the tests. But they are slightly better than our original, and they're slightly cheaper than our original as well, I think because you don't need to get to the same high temperatures when you handle it. So time and again, things that we've done, stripping unnecessary weight out of the bike, reduces some of the carbon in the bike and makes the bike better for the child to ride. We wouldn't do anything that was going to compromise the quality of the bikes, but quite often what we've chosen to do has benefited the bikes as well as our footprint and sometimes the bottom line as well. So that's just delightful. It's not what we expected. And I think perhaps more businesses, it might help them take those first steps, or the more difficult steps, if they can see that it's not expensive and it's not a compromise. There's actual hard commercial benefits from doing this.
It was interesting what you said as well about starting with the energy savings, because that's something when I'm talking to businesses, often I would say, well, start there if this is hard to get over the line, because there will be financial savings. You start with the efficiency pieces, because then you can start building up a pot as well, so that when you do then need to invest, you've got this sort of pot of savings that you've built up that you can then invest, rather than creating a business case for investment right from the start.
Yeah, absolutely. Another example of that, we were looking at trying to get more people into electric vehicles. So we were looking at how much we spend on fuel expenses, reimbursing people for grey travel in their own cars between our head office and our factory, which are a couple of 100 miles apart. Very, very easy to say, actually, instead, we'll lease a couple of EVs and we'll put charging units in each site, and they've got solar panels or the renewable energy on each site. And it was much, much cheaper to lease a couple of EVs than to reimburse people 45p a mile for their petrol cars. And the side benefit being, people said, oh, never thought I'd drive an EV. It's lovely. It goes further than I thought. It charges up quickly. I might consider getting one myself next time. So yes, start with the financial benefits, because you'll probably be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, that's really nice. Sally, I know we've had various conversations over the years about when you've been trying to make, you've had to make hard decisions that are maybe testing your values, and you've got this purpose, but actually in the here and now, some of the shorter term decisions you're having to make are really sort of testing those values. Could you sort of tell us about some of those decisions that where you've been kind of your resolve has been tested, I suppose?
Yeah, and I think, look, let's face it, I call running a business like a contact sport. If you've ever watched rugby, there's nothing clean and nice around running a business. And certainly I've done it now for 25 years, and I'd say the last 5 years it's getting harder and harder. It's brutal. So there is no let up to that sort of test that it has on you. But what I think I would say that has surprised me, and perhaps we don't talk about enough, is how resilient you become when you are really focused on that long-term sort of purpose. Because our industry, my industry particularly, is being really disrupted. Everybody's industry is, by AI and other things. And yet when you're looking at that long term, what are we trying to do here? There's a stability in that keeps your resolve. it keeps your eyes on that longer term prize. And I think you then, and here's a nice a sort of phrase that I like, but this is around taking an owner mentality rather than a renter mentality. If you even imagine that as a flat or a house, if you go into a rented accommodation, just the way you might treat it might be different than when you own something. Now, for us, that isn't just me, because when I moved the ownership of our business from me to all of our employees, I got this huge owner mentality across the whole business, and my entire organization are going, well, hey, Sally, look, we've got to make some difficult decisions. Maybe we need to do this in a more innovative way. Maybe we do. A couple of years ago, our team came to me and said, we don't want a Christmas party this year. We don't want one because it's been a tough year. And imagine as an owner going to someone and saying, we're not going to have a Christmas party this year. It doesn't go down well. But when they come to you because they've got that mentality, I think it really shifts the whole perspective of the business. I don't feel like I'm on my own running this. I feel like we're all in it together. So I think that's something that, keeps us a bit more resilient.
Yeah, and it's interesting, at the beginning, most people here are, are in privately owned businesses. And, you are all in privately owned businesses, but I think I'm curious about how that changes when you are in a business that's maybe taken on investment, having worked with businesses that have taken on private equity investment. I think that starts to impact some of this decision making because you've got that different perspective coming in.
Mm.
Sebs, Shelley, anything either of you want to add?
No, nothing.
No. Okay. Well, I'll add something. I suppose in terms of some of the hard truths about running an impact-led business, for me, it is I have to have really difficult conversations quite often, because one of the things we did is we invented this new methodology called sustainable financial planning, which said when we use assumptions about the future, we'll be guided by science. Most of our industry just says, let's look back at the last 50 years and reflect that into the future. Look, everything's fine. You just have to save a bit more for your pension. And that's all you need to worry about for the future. And if you use science-led assumptions about the future, then you rapidly come to a very, very scary place. And people don't come to a financial planner to be told, well, there might not be a long term. That's not what they're coming for the advice, but that is one of the possible future pathways that's out there. So it's a bit like kicking a puppy. It's not something you want to be doing. People are aspiring for what I've got these great dreams for retirement, and science is telling us, yeah, you might not get that, not on our current trajectory, which means that current trajectory is unacceptable and we have to change it. And then you feel incredibly small because you think, well, what on earth can we do as a tiny company to change that global trajectory? So that sort of constantly having to address and deal with the long term when the future is quite a scary place is a really hard thing to carry emotionally. But it is also the source of our greatest inspiration, because we think, wow, if we've got a really big problem to solve, how do we have we're not going to solve the problem, we're obviously not, but we can say at the very least, well, we did as much as we felt we could. We did as much as we could to contribute towards that solution. And so it forced us to think about how we scale impact rather than scaling the business.
Can you talk a bit more about that, Seb? Because I think, I use your business as a case study in terms of, you are small, but you're punching massively above your weight in terms of, being clear on that impact that you want to have, and then really trying to create ripples of change and influence far more widely than just your business or your clients. I think it's quite inspirational what you're doing.
Well, we sat down with you and said, let's create an impact report. I didn't.
It's not scripted. Not scripted.
But we had this problem that we're like, well, the future's an unacceptable place. How do we change trajectory? How do we contribute towards changing that? And therefore we had to say, right, what is our impact? And then we worked out, well, we're sat in the finance system. The finance system is like the source code of the economy. So if we can hack this, then we can make change that is enormous. And I'm in a parochial little corner of the finance industry. Well, actually, we're a parochial little corner of the finance industry. We're the only bit that talks one-to-one in depth to our clients. And the finance industry is influenced from the center out with really, really short holding periods. So there's this thing called high frequency trading where people are buying and selling stocks and their holding periods can be microseconds. And then you have fund managers managing funds who really care about their quarterly bonus. They say they care about other things, but they don't. They really, really care about their quarterly bonus, and that's it. And then you have financial advisors who are sort of like, what's my 1 and 3 year numbers so I can look good and impressive in front of my client? And then you have a client who has a holding period of 40 years. And it doesn't matter what happens in the short term, but it matters enormously what happens in 40 years' time. And the direction of influence that goes from microseconds out to 40 years is traveling in the wrong direction. So we needed to work out, how do we make sure that clients' voices are the ones that's influencing what the investment decision is. And we couldn't do that unless we were telling the truth to our clients. And then we realized, well, actually, the rest of our profession is not really telling the truth because they're using wrong assumptions. It's not something they've done on purpose. It's a systemic problem. So if it's a systemic problem, how do we change the system? And then we realized we don't have to be big to do that. If you've got expertise and if you've got time, then you can find your way into positions of influence within the profession. And it takes time and it takes a huge amount of collaboration. But once you find yourself on the boards, then the voice that we can do, the best practice that we can write, can have an impact at the scale of our profession. And potentially our profession is really, really impactful.
Yeah. I love what you said about it taking time. You've spotted where you want to get, you're clear on your purpose and the impact you want to have. You've spotted potentially how you can do that, but it takes time to get yourself into those positions. You can't just flick the switch overnight. And having seen you, gradually take on more positions of responsibility over the last few years, it's a patient exercise, isn't it?
It's a patient, but change is non-linear. So
yeah,
you win an award and then you get appointed to one board. I got on the Solar Advisory Board, and then you get invited to join the PFS Sustainable Advice Forum, and then you get appointed on an FCA commission board to write best practice. And so the opportunity set opens up the more of it that you do. And people come to, oh, Seb, you're an expert on sustainable finance. I was like, well, look, I wasn't when I started. I was just a normal financial advisor, but I guess now I am.
But I suppose having that North Star and that purpose and being really clear on the impact you want to have has enabled you to spot where something is going to help you on that journey versus where something is not and is a distraction. And so, you've said no to things and you've stepped away from things that aren't helping you towards that North Star.
Yeah, I've also said yes to things that on the face of it didn't appear exactly helpful, but I got something from it. Yeah. So I guess it was the freedom to experiment and get things wrong, and nonetheless take learnings from it that I can then apply somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, you've talked there about mistakes. What mistakes have you made? What have you learned from them? I don't know, Sally, Shelley, do you want to talk about some of your mistakes?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would love to pick up on Seb's point of giving yourself the wriggle room to make mistakes. I can be cheesy here and say, is it a fail or is it a step towards a success? I think you have to be brave enough to be able to accept it and just go, well, some of this is going to work and some of it isn't. And I think, Shelley, you sort of alluded to that a minute ago, that sometimes we didn't expect that outcome. And it was a nice surprise, and I would really acknowledge here that I'm lucky and really fortunate that when it's your own business and it's your own decisions, I haven't got someone breathing down my neck, an investor, or certainly in my corporate environment, I would have had less bravery to make those mistakes. So it's very easy for me to come on this and go, yeah, I've made loads of mistakes, and I have. I think one of my mistakes is seeing, and I think we all face this, seeing the scale of the problems and going, well, down to me to solve them then. And, jumping in feet first with everything, spreading ourselves too thin and not really moving the dial. And I think, I'm sure it was you, Hannah, that first introduced me to this concept of a line, and below the line is all the sort of negative impacts, but above the line, you choose this kind of real focused opportunity that you can change a specific thing. And Seb and Shelley, I think you've both done this really well. And it was that epiphany that made me go, aha, I'm going to change the workplace culture. I cannot change everything. I can't reverse racism overnight, but I can start in the workplace. And actually, we started to see traction then about how we could do things. And a real simple mistake that we made was we thought we could only do this with our clients. So we thought the only place we could make impact was by selling our services to clients. And it was then when we started to go, oh, hang on a minute, everything we do can impact this. So we, first of all, we tied our pro bono work. We were doing lots of charity work, but it wasn't anything to do with our purpose. Seems a bit obvious now, but it wasn't at the time. So we put something together called The Big Difference, where we made a competition for charities that were making a difference to workplace. And we said, right, enter this. And if you're making a big difference in the workplace, then we'll support you. So we're now supporting a charity called Talent Tap. And we also opened a community for people who are making workplace culture better, even though they're not paying us to, because I can lead the charge. So I think the biggest mistake was find the difference you're trying to make in the world and focus on that. And you can't solve everything else. I can't sit here and solve the things that Seb and Shelley are. But they're doing it for me. So that's great. And then there's loads and loads of other businesses, like all the people on the call, who are all doing their individual thing. So I guess to quote you, Hannah, choose the one thing you want to make a difference to and get on with it.
No, thank you. Shelley, what about you? Mistakes and learnings?
I think we assumed that everybody around us cared as much about the environment and about impact as we did. As founders, I'm lucky that I founded the business with my husband. Luckily, we had the same values on sustainability. We talked about it hugely, and many of our team were really engaged. And some of them just a bit of a blank look. They just wanted to come to work and do their job, and that's fine. But we recognized we were getting a bit frustrated. Why is everyone not caring about it as much as we were? So we had to take a bit of a step back and have a word with ourselves, and take a different approach to taking people with us. And sometimes it was a bit of an education piece. So we've done a lot of climate literacy on why does this matter? Why does this matter to businesses? Why are businesses partly responsible? What in your personal and professional lives can you individually do about it? Try and make people feel a bit more empowered. Recognize that it's not about light bulbs and recycling. It's a bit bigger than that. But what can you do when you come to work, which can have this really quite big impact? And then trying to spread that out, I guess, to our ecosystem, to very, very much what Sally and Seb have said already. We're quite small, but perhaps we've got that flexibility to be a little bit more nimble, or to try things, to try and fail. So we've perhaps taken steps that some of our bigger competitors or other people in manufacturing haven't been able to do so quickly. And recently, Jerry was asked to go and talk to the metals engineering team at Volvo about what we're doing with recycled aluminium, and that was crazy. We're tiny. The amount of aluminium we buy, absolutely tiny, but they were really curious to see what was possible and how we've managed to do it. And there's lots of moments like that we think, oh, this is actually quite exciting. We've been able to take the risks, but now let's see how we can amplify that around the whole ecosystem that we interact with. So it's important to be brave, I think, but I've gone on two completely different tangents there. I was starting with mistakes we made, but ended up somewhere completely different. But I'm quite serious about saying everyone on this call is probably quite convinced, probably on quite a clear path. Not everybody around you will necessarily have bought into that yet.
Mm. So yeah, I wanted to ask you about influence, how you influence stakeholders, lots of different stakeholders, whether that's suppliers, clients, employees, customers, because it's a question that comes up time and again. And when I asked before, this conversation, what the people, who've all signed up for it, what they wanted to hear about influencing comes up time and again. So, what do you do? All three of you, what have you done to influence all those different stakeholders, especially when I think, the market is tough at the moment. If you're working with businesses, they're finding it hard. They're just trying to keep the show on the road. You've got, people working for you who, maybe struggling to pay the bills at home. They're really busy. The day to day just threatens to take over. How do we influence them, and encourage them to think that this is the right thing to do and they should join us on the journey?
This could be a good one for us all to have a very different perspective on, because I'm going to say communication, it sits at the heart of all of this, because of course I'm a bit biased. I think Seb's going to say that money sits at the heart of all this, but I'd say, storytelling is really critical, and everything starts with language. And, we are a storytelling species. We create narratives for ourselves. We even dream in narratives. We live by narratives. And I think, and I've experienced exactly what Shelley says, is that, not all of your team are going to be on the journey at the same place. And so we had to do a lot of work to explain B Corp, to explain this direction, to explain employee ownership, etc. And we did it through stories. And to your point, Hannah, about, there's a living crisis and people want more money in their pockets. And at the end of the day, we're not necessarily paying the highest, we're not overpaying our staff. We have mid-range salaries. So we can't compete with the big London, rich agencies. And yet my creative director is ex-McCann. My strategy director is ex-Ogilvy. And for those not in my industry, these are big brand, corporate, paying lots of money type brands. But again, I'm biased. Workplace culture, the journey you bring people on, the way you treat them, the way you involve them, that speaks much louder than a salary. And, I won't ever take the mick out of my team. We will always pay benchmark salaries where we can, and we will continue to benchmark. But I can't overpay for the talent that I have. I use my culture as my lever to get the best talent at a better price than my competitors do, and then give that service to my clients. So they're getting better bang for their buck. And I think there's a huge story in there about the strength of ethics and doing the right thing.
Thank you,
So that answered the question.
I'd actually 100% agree with you that it's about storytelling. There are only approximately 32,000 regulated financial planners in the UK, or financial advisors. A subset of those will be planners. So if they're having 100 quality conversations a year, they probably have a lot more than that. That's 3.2 million conversations. The stories that they tell, the financial planning stories, are not neutral. They're predominantly fictional stories about limitless growth, ignoring planetary boundaries, with an assumption that equity is just going to keep growing at 6 or 7% a year, or 5, 7 or 9 on your projections. They're not based in science. If we told a different story, now we tell these stories to a really important, powerful section of community, those that have money. And so if we told a different story, then that would become a systemic force for change. So we're trying to write some better narratives and some better stories, and not just write them, but then share them distributed by design as best practice examples. So we've given them to our the Personal Finance Society is my professional body, and they publish our best practice guide. But it's not just about best practice. We're also working on undermining I firmly believe that if you are not telling the truth about the future, then what you are doing is you are misleading your clients, and that is in breach of our professional ethics and our own rules. And so it's not just about creating the best practice, it's also about creating a big stick to go and hit people with, because a metaphorical stick, let me just clarify that. A metaphorical stick called a lawyer or a complaints department or a, you know, but if you just go into the professional bodies and say everything you're doing is wrong, you're not going to get anywhere. If you say, hey, there's this vision of how we could improve our profession, and once they agree that that's a good vision of how you improve our profession, then you can move on to, well, that means what we're doing at the moment is non-compliant. That's a problem, isn't it? And that's a more effective way. But ultimately, we'll need both carrot and stick to shift the industry.
I'm very aware of time, and I know that there's lots of questions been coming in from everybody else here in the room. Heather, have you got a few that have jumped out at you that you want to ask to Sally, Sebastian, and Shelley?
I don't have any questions in the chat, but we do have one that came in a bit earlier. So we've got, so I would encourage everyone to add any questions that they might have for our brilliant panel in the chat while we address this first question here. We've got a question about leaving a legacy. So does that matter to you? And does that drive your motivation to be impactful? Who would like to take that one?
I'm very happy to say that one. I think that's exactly the word. And I love that whoever wrote that question, you know, I hit my 50th birthday and thought, hang on, how do I look my children in the eye in the future and say, I ran a business and that bought this house and that did this and that and the other, without saying, and I left a legacy. You know, I had been championing women in business for a long time. That's a very sad thing to have to champion. But I became more and more aware, and especially in 2020 when I was hitting 50, because we had the sad death of George Floyd, that this wasn't about gender inequity. There was just enormous inequities across the board. And I just thought, no, this is my phase now. This is a decade of legacy. And that's why employee ownership was really critical to me. B Corp was critical. Yeah, so whoever asked that question, yes, that is exactly the word for me.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Sally. Does anyone else want to jump in on that one?
I will, if that's all right, I'll jump in and say, one of my expertise is around clients in vulnerable situations and older clients. I'm on the advisory board of SOLID, Society of Later Life Advisors. So I work with lots and lots of older clients right up until the end of life. And actually, all you have left at the end is legacy. People often assume that the older you get, the shorter the timescales you think about. And actually, the reverse is entirely true. That young clients in their 40s that are struggling with being in the sandwich generation, you know, looking after older clients, children going to school, running the business, sometimes their timescales can be just surviving the day. You know, that can be true of older clients, but they're thinking, well, I don't have that much longer. They know that, they're comfortable with that, but they're thinking about what world are they going to be leaving their nieces and nephews and children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And they're thinking back to a time when they were little that is hard for us to imagine, the amount of change that they've seen. And they're thinking forward. So their timescales might be looking back 90 years and looking forward 100 years. And so they can have some of the longest timescales, and actually legacy becomes everything at that point in time, because what else have you got if you're too unable to move freely enough to spend this money that you've hoarded? There's no point having it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Seb. I do have another question here that I like the look of as well. And somebody has asked, in fact, it was Claire Lawson, so thank you, Claire. How do you measure the business value of the sustainability and impact work that you do?
I can try and jump on that very quickly. It's partly about de-risking supply chains. That definitely adds value to the business. It's about future-proofing business from a sustainability point of view in terms of any carbon taxes, any reporting requirements, any, just conditions of doing business, getting ahead of the curve, making sure you're doing the right thing, doing better than your competitors, that you've got the big stuff, you've got a plan to reduce it. That it might be quite hard to put a financial value on it, but there's no question it adds value to the business. And then the way that your customer base sees you is substantially different, I think, when you're doing the right thing, when you're telling the right stories, when you're really engaging the community around you. There's a quite lasting business benefit, I think, in doing the right thing. So I can't give you a number. I wouldn't attempt to. It would be wrong if I did. But it's quite a big driver, I think, of business stability and growth.
Yeah, I'd probably add to that if I can, Heather, that sustainability often means carbon emissions and trees and sort of biodiversity to everyone. But I just want to always champion the people that are behind this. And obviously when people say, oh, we've got to save the planet, I'm like, the planet's fine. And I know a lot of you on this call will have heard of this. The planet is fine. It will live without us quite happily. It is us, it's humanity that needs a bit of saving here. And I think when I take it into the workforce, we haven't got a sustainable workforce. We've got, 1 in 3 employees around the world that are at risk of burnout. We have got a huge shift in the future of work that's unraveling before our eyes, and it's like that sort of cheese run that people do, where our legs have got so fast that and AI and automation and everything has got so fast that we are really struggling to catch up. So I would encourage everyone to think about the sustainability of how they're going to run their businesses, not just from a financial view, but from a people view, and what this looks like into the future. I would encourage people to look at Gen Z and how they want to work and operate, because often the way, as Seb keeps saying, the way we've done things in the past is not going to work in the future. And I think Gen Z are not coming in to work the way that we have. So sustainability for me is about people as much as it is about everything else.
I'd add to that, use the right benchmark. So I would say that because I'm a financial advisor. And what benchmark are we measuring ourselves against? We assume that business as usual is just going to carry on. And it's not. The Institute of Active Actuaries have published a really important risk dashboard, which I think actually changes the interpretation of fiduciary duty and therefore has legal implications. We're going to start seeing cases coming on this soon. But what it's saying is the current trajectory, it takes us to a disaster by 2050. So a reasonable assumption is just amortize business as usual down to 0 by 2050. And it won't be a nice gentle line. In reality, it will be a series of spiky downward movements. So to not change, to not be sustainable, is to obliterate yourself. And only if you put that benchmark in does almost any action you take toward sustainability is not seen as a cost against the status quo. It's seen as an investment in the future.
So on that positive note, I want to be practical, because those of you who know me well know that I like action, and I want us to be really pragmatic. I want to give people actions to take away. So quick fire question for the 3 of you. What is one thing that someone listening could do next week to integrate impact into the heart of their business? Seb, let's start with you. So one thing, quick fire answer.
Start to understand where their expertise lies, because in that you might find that you're a really, really, really important person in transition, because there might not be many other people in the world that have your expertise, have your insight into your local systems, and also have the motivation to make change. And so it comes back to finding what's ours to do.
Thank you. Shelley?
Yeah, just to build on that, map out what in your business is probably going to have, it's probably currently having the biggest negative impact. If you're not sure, use ChatGPT, describe your business and ask it. It'll probably give you a pretty good clue. And then, really importantly, talk to your whole team about what they care about. How do they want you as a business to address that change? Because you've got to take them with you. You've got to use everybody in the organization. And it's quite surprising sometimes what people really care about and where their energies lie. You've got to harness that as well. So try and match those two things. What's the biggest problem you need to solve? And who in your team, back to Seb's point about your particular talents, who's going to help you deliver that? And then it's much more likely to succeed.
Yeah, I guess I'm next, Hannah. I would say absolutely really question yourself on what is the focus of the thing that what the difference you want to make in the world. I think a few years ago, I thought I was pretty clear on this, but without making your head grow too much, Hannah, I started working with you and realized that we hadn't aligned everything behind this. It was almost like it was my secret passion versus what I'd aligned our entire business to. And I think, Hannah, you've really guided us on connecting everything from our pro bono work to our supply chain, to our client approach and our community, and everything towards this one thing that we're making an impact on. And that's dialed it up tenfold from being my little sort of plaything to being front and center in our business. So if you think you've got it sussed, perhaps you need to question whether you've really aligned everything to it.
Super. Thank you. So hopefully that's been a fantastic conversation. We could keep going a lot longer. Hopefully it's given you some ideas and it's encouraged you to take action in your business, because without action, there is no impact. And there are 3 specific ways you can do that right now. Firstly, if you're ready to act now, then you can book a call with me where we'll explore where your business is now and the next steps you can take to integrate impact into the heart of your business. Secondly, I'm hosting a free masterclass on the 18th of November where I will share a framework that will enable you to have a structured, intentional approach to impact. And Jen is going to share the link for that in the chat now, together with links for the other things. And then number 3, if you are ready to tell your impact story, so Sally and Seb talked about the importance of storytelling. If you're ready to tell that story, then Heather and I have got capacity to support 2 more businesses with their impact report before Christmas. So if impact reporting is your priority right now, then please do reach out. So Jen has put the links to all of those 3 options in the chat, and I'll also email them to you together with the recording from today. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much to Sally, Seb and Shelley. Thank you. That's been absolutely brilliant. I really appreciate you giving us your time today. Thank you, Heather, for managing the Q&A. And thank you, Jen, for being an invaluable support behind the scenes. And thank you to all of you for coming. I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and good luck with scaling up your impact. Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Take care.